Hi there, I'm Valerie Patterson. I'm an art teacher as well as an artist, and I'm very pleased that you're joining me for this exploration of watercolor paintings for beginners. This is session 1, and what we'll be doing is I'll be sharing some watercolor paintings with you, and we'll be talking about supplies and also about color. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. So what is watercolor? Well, watercolor is paint that use a small amount of pigment mixed with water and traditionally done on paper. Watercolors are different from other paints due to their fluidity and transparency. And so because of those things, sometimes they feel really unpredictable. So the artist must find a balance between controlling watercolors and kind of freeing it up to get just the effects that you would like to have. Because watercolor paints can be a challenge to control, it's extremely important to buy good high-end supplies, especially when it comes to paper and brushes. With regards to watercolor paints, you want a professional grade rather than a student grade because there's more pigment in it, and a very small amount of watercolor will go a really long way. It's best to use cotton rag watercolor paper, which comes in 2 different weights, 140 pound and 300 pound. 140 pound is fairly thin and must be soaked and stretched or taped down to a more stiff surface to prevent warping, which I'll show you in a few minutes. The 275 to 300 pound paper is thick enough so that it will not warp and you don't need to tape it down. And that's what I prefer to use just because it's so much easier. However, it is a lot more expensive. Watercolor paper is available with 3 different kinds of surfaces. One is rough, one is a cold press, and one is called hot press. The rough paper is good for direct larger painting without small detail, and if you're just going to put the color down once and not rework it very much. Cold press is probably the best all-around paper surface. It has some texture, but is smooth enough for detailed work. And hot press is very smooth, allows the paint to slide around on the surface more, tends to record each brush stroke that you make, so it's not best for the beginners. It can be a kind of a challenge to keep things looking the way you want them to look and non-streaky. But it is excellent for highly detailed work, and I tend to use the hot press paper. But for this class, we're going to be using the good all-around paper, the cold press. The brushes we'll be using in this class are synthetic haired brushes. I favor them because they're more durable and they tend to produce some very crisp lines when you need them. What you don't ever want to see with your brushes over time is a brush that's gone what I call rogue. So if you kind of look at this brush, you can see these little stray hairs that will make these extra lines that you don't want, so it interferes with your control of the watercolor. Just for a little bit of information for you, if you really get into watercolors, what are considered the best kind of watercolor brushes are called Kolinsky brushes. And they're made with the male winter Kolinsky, which is an Asian weasel's hair from his tail, which is apparently very bushy. They're quite expensive. I've tried them. I was not impressed with them because I had a harder time controlling the paint. But if you have a looser style, then a Kolinsky brush might be just the thing you're looking for. Something you're going to need from home is some sort of old rag or a sponge to just use to wipe off your brushes with. You'll use those quite a bit. And you can see I just have a really old cloth that I use over and over again. And between each painting, I just wash it, rinse it off with soap and water. But also, like I said, a sponge works really well too. So if you ever use 140 pound watercolor paper, because it's a lighter weight, once the water gets on it, it tends to warp. So what you need to do is you need to wet down the paper totally and then tape it down to a flat, solid surface. So what I'm going to do, I've got the small piece here, and I'm going to put water all over the entire sheet. Now, if you have a bigger sheet or you have a big sink, you can just put the whole sheet of paper right in your sink. Just immerse it right in that water. And that works really well. But then you want to kind of take a squeegee or something and get some of that water off a little bit. But okay, once it's all wet, you're going to take some tape and you're going to tape down the edges. that one's off a little bit, but it'll still be okay. And then once you've taped it down, you can just leave it to dry. You definitely want it dry before you paint on it, unless, of course, you're doing a wet on wet wash. But otherwise, you want this to dry. And then you can just keep that paper taped down to that surface while you create your painting. And then you would take the tape off once your painting is all done. And the tape makes a little nice white border. So before I continue and we start talking about some different watercolor techniques, I'd like to share with you some of my works. You can just kind of see the kind of thing that I've been doing. I do work in a super hyper realistic style on the hot press paper, that really smooth surface. That works best for me. And then following my work, you'll see some work by some other watercolor artists with some different styles, because there's all kinds of different ways you can use this medium. And hopefully by the end of this course, or if you continue with watercolor painting, hopefully you'll come up with your own kind of style, whatever works best for you. Hey, I hope you enjoyed checking out those watercolor paintings. Next, I'd like to talk about color, because color is super important in paintings. So here's the color wheel, which looks pretty complicated right now, but we're going to break it up into much smaller pieces to make it a little easier to understand. So the color wheel begins with the three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And the three primary colors are amazing because when you mix them together with each other, you're going to get brand new colors, which is something really that the other colors cannot do. So here, coming up next, you'll see that I have the yellow, red, and blue primary colors that I put down with the watercolors. And if you mix, which I did, red and yellow together, you're going to get orange. And if you mix orange and blue together, you're going to get green. And if you mix blue and red together, you're going to get purple. So here you can see I have added to my little watercolor color chart. So our new colors, orange, green, and purple, are the secondary colors because they come second after the primary colors. So the next chart shows not only the primary colors and the secondary colors, but it also adds in the tertiary colors. The tertiary colors you get by mixing a primary color with a secondary color. So if you mix blue with purple, you're going to get blue-purple. If you mix yellow with orange, you're going to get yellow-orange. And you always use the name of the primary color first when you're naming these colors. Next come the complementary colors. The complementary colors are the colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel. So yellow and purple and orange and blue and green and red. So what's special about complementary colors? Well, when you put them next to each other in a painting, they really kind of pop. They make each other pop. But also, when you mix them together, they neutralize each other or make each other more dark. And they do that without muddying up the color. That is really important because if you were to add black to a color to make it darker, it does really muddy it up. And we really want our colors to sing and look bright. So in this class, I never want you to add black to a color. Black definitely has its uses, but never, ever, ever mixed with a color. Colors also have value in a painting. Now, value defines how light or dark any given color is. Within any drawing or painting, there's almost always a variety of values. How do you create values? Well, one way is to create a value scale. To create a value scale, you use one color at a time, and you make swatches of squares from dark to light. Now, to create watercolor a value that's very dark, you use a very small amount of water with the paint. And as you go through your scale, you gradually add more and more water into each little swatch that you're adding to this scale or this bar. The more colors you create a value scale for, the more practice you're going to have and the better you will get at creating different values. So the first exercise I'd like you to work on this week is to create your own color wheel and value studies on a small piece of your watercolor paper. The more you do anything, the better you're going to get at it. So just keep on going. Just practice, practice, practice. The second exercise I'd like you to work on this week involves creating two approximately 6 inches by 9 inch paintings of small landscapes. Now, a small landscape is a view of anything pretty much outdoors. So it could have something with trees, mountains, ponds, rivers, boats, cars, buildings, all those things you'd find outdoors. I'd like you to use photos to work from. Could be your own photo, or it could be something you find on the internet. And I would like you to draw the image first with a pencil. So just do a quick little sketch first with your pencil. Choose landscapes that you like. Make this an enjoyable exercise. If you choose something you're not going to like, it's not going to be any fun to do. Hey, if you ever have any questions or concerns with regards to watercolor during this class, please feel free to email me at any time you'd like, and I will do my very best to get back to you quickly.